Friends, I am Dr. K.D. Mishra and today we will discuss the structure and function of cardiovascular system, especially the organization of cardiovascular system and structure of heart. You know, the cardiovascular system is an important system of our body, not only because that it transports all the materials to the tissue and all the cells, but it also maintains homeostasis, and it is a vital system which is important in thermoregulation, in homeostatic functions, in fluid balance, so on. The CBS plays important role to deal with day-to-day challenges of our body. That is during exercise, during stress, during strain, any kind of strain, during heat condition, during cold conditions, during emotions, whatever physiological changes takes place in our body, cardiovascular system is very important in maintaining a homeostatic condition in the body, and it is important for maintaining the metabolic rate of the body required at that particular time. Now, you must have noticed that during these days, there has been a change in the lifestyle of people. The lifestyle of people has become sedentary, and as a result, the incidences of cardiovascular disorders has increased, like hypertension, myocardial infarction, stroke, and congestive heart failure. These days, the cases of these diseases have increased to a very significant level. Now, blood is circulated in a closed system. You know, when we study the circulatory system, it is basically of two types. One is open type of circulatory system and one is closed type of circulatory system. So, ours, the CBS is a closed type of circulatory system, in that the blood always remains within the blood vessels, within the network of blood vessels. It flows from arteries to arterioles, then from arterioles to capillaries, then capillary forms venules, then they form veins, and veins form vena cava, and again it is returned to the heart. So, it always remains inside the cardiovascular system, therefore, it is called as closed circulatory system. Now, CBS includes a heart and blood vessel. The heart is the central pumping station from where blood is pumped. It includes heart, arteries, capillaries, and veins. So, blood always remains in this system and it is returned back to the heart. Now, components of cardiovascular system. If we consider the components of circulatory system, then it can be broadly divided into two. One is systemic circulation. In systemic circulation, blood is supplied in the body and then it is returned back to the heart. So, blood is pumped from the left ventricle into the systemic arch or aorta, then from there it is supplied to different organs of the body, and then from there it is returned back to the heart into the right auricle. So, this circuit is called systemic circulation. It is major part of circulation. It contains about 80 to 85% of the total blood volume. the pressure in this system is always higher because the blood is pumped from the heart at a higher pressure. So, the pressure remains 100 to 140 millimeter of mercury. The second component of circulatory system is the pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary refers to lungs. So, when blood is supplied from heart to the lungs and after getting oxygenated, when it returns back to the heart for pumping again into the body, this circuit is called as pulmonary circulation. Circulation through the pulmonary vascular bed. It is also called central or lesser circulation. This systemic circulation, since it is important in supplying the blood to the peripheral part of the body, it is called as peripheral circulation, whereas this pulmonary circulation, it is just heart pumps the blood from here to the lungs and from lungs it is returned back to the heart. So, this circulatory part is confined to the central part of the body, therefore, it is called central or lesser circulation. It circulates venous blood to the lung and arterial blood is collected back into the heart. It contains only 10 to 12% of the total blood volume. Now, a question arises when there is about 80 to 85% blood in the systemic circulation and there is only 10 to 12% blood in the central circulation, that is in the pulmonary circulation, then what about the rest of the amount of blood? The rest amount of blood remains in the tissue and organs. Now, here in this picture is a simplified picture in which you can see the systemic circulation as well as pulmonary circulation. As you can see, the heart, this is the right part of heart, this is left part of heart. From the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood is supplied to the lungs through pulmonary aorta, the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery, and in lungs the blood gets oxygenated and from there it is returned back to the heart in the left auricle, from there into left ventricle, and from left ventricle it is pumped into the body in the anterior part of the head region and the posterior part, in the thoracic part, in the lower extremities. The blood is supplied and then it is again returned back to the heart through the venous collection through vena cava. Again, the same illustration in a different way. Here you can see how blood is supplied to different organs. You know, this is the right auricle, right ventricle, left auricle, left ventricle. From the right ventricle, blood is supplied to the lungs, both lungs, and from there the oxygenated blood is collected into the left auricle. From there it is poured into left ventricle, and from left ventricle through aorta it is supplied to anterior part of the body, the head region, the neck region, then it is supplied to the thoracic region, then it is supplied to the abdominal region, then lower extremities, and from all these parts blood is collected again, venous blood is collected and it is poured into the right auricle through inferior vena cava, this is inferior vena cava, and superior vena cava. In addition to that, about 10% of the blood is supplied to the heart also, because heart is also an organ which functions throughout our life. So, it also needs a blood supply for both. It needs blood supply for supplying oxygen to the cardiac muscles. It requires blood supply for the supply of nutrients to the cardiac muscles. So, that also returns to a vein coronary sinus into the right auricle. Now, here is the distribution of blood volume in the different components of circulatory system. As I just mentioned, that major part of the blood volume remains in the systemic circulation. Here you can see a person weighing about 70 kg of weight has a average blood volume of 5 to 6 liters. Now, out of that, this 80 to 85% remains in the systemic circulation, out of which about 60% remains in capillaries and venous compartment, whereas only 10 to 12% remains in the pulmonary circulation, and here it is almost equally distributed in the arteries, capillaries and veins. And 5 to 10% of the cardiac output is supplied to the heart itself. As I just mentioned, heart also needs a continuous supply of blood for its oxygen and nutritional requirements. Now, here in this pie diagram, you can see the distribution of the volume of blood. Here you know the systemic veins and venules, they have about 60% blood. Then in other parts of the systemic circulation, heart 5 to 10%, systemic arteries and arterioles 12 to 15%, systemic capillaries about 5%. So, this makes 60 plus 5 plus 15 plus 10, this is about 80 to 90% of blood remains in the systemic circulation, whereas only 10 to 12% remains in the pulmonary circulation. The percentage distribution of blood, it is shown here in this pie diagram. Now, the distribution of blood in the parts of the body. One term is called central blood volume. Central blood volume is the volume of blood which is present in the central region of the body. It includes thoracic region, pulmonary region, heart, superior vena cava, and then anterior part of the inferior vena cava and aorta. So, 25% of the blood remains in the central circulation, whereas peripheral blood volume accounts for as much as 75%. It includes blood present in the veins of extremities or legs, hands, the abdominal part, the head and neck region, and this part contributes to about 75%. Now, any shift in this volume, that is central blood volume and peripheral blood volume, is physiologically important. because it determines the cardiac output. Now, how it can determine the cardiac output? You know, whatever blood is returned from the body into the right auricle of heart, the same will be pumped into the lungs, and the same amount will be returned back to the heart, and then it will be pumped into systemic circulation for different organs of the body. So, the cardiac output, that is the amount of blood pumped from the heart, that depends on the amount of blood that is received into the heart. So, there comes the importance of these two, that is central blood volume and peripheral blood volume. It should be maintained properly. Now, the heart is situated in our thoracic cavity. It is equal to the size of the owner's fist. It is located like this, and the weight of the heart is about 300 gram in adult. The heart is made up of 4 chambers, 2 atria or auricles and 2 ventricles. The upper chambers, that is atria or auricles, are the receiving chambers of the heart, where blood is received in the heart. In the right portion, blood is received from the body, and in the left auricle, it is received from the lungs. Then there are 2 pumping chambers in the heart. They are ventricles. From there, blood is pumped either in the body or in the lungs. From the right ventricle, deoxygenated venous blood is pumped into the lungs, and from left ventricle, oxygenated blood is pumped into different parts of the body. The 2 chambers, that is 2 auricles, 2 upper chambers, they are partitioned by a partition like this. There is a partition here. This is right auricle, this is left auricle. So, there is a partition here. It is called as interauricular septum. Similarly, there is a partition between the 2 ventricles. It is called as interventricular septum, this one. Now, there is a partition between auricles and ventricles. This is called as AB partition. This is made up of fibrous tissue which is non-conductive of impulse. We will discuss this later, and in that there are 2 valves which do not allow the backflow of blood from ventricles to auricles at the time of ventricular contraction. Now, this is the internal structure of heart. You can see there are 2 auricles here, the right auricle and left auricle. There are 2 ventricles, right ventricle and left ventricle, and these 2 are separated, auricles are separated, atria are separated by interatrial septum, and ventricle is separated by interventricular septum. Now, in the right auricle, blood is received from all parts of the body. From lower part, the thoracic region, blood is collected by the inferior vena cava, and from upper part of the body, blood is collected from superior vena cava. In addition to that, whatever blood is supplied to the heart by coronary artery, that is also returned to heart and it is poured into right auricle through coronary sinus. So, blood from all parts of the body is collected in the right auricle and from there it is poured into right ventricle. From there it is pumped into the body through aorta. Now, the deoxygenated blood which has been supplied to the lungs through pulmonary aorta and pulmonary arteries, after getting oxygenated in the lungs, it is returned back to the left atrium, and from left atrium the blood is poured into left ventricle, and from left ventricle it is pumped into aorta for supplying to the different regions of the body. Now, between these two ventricles also there is an intraventricular septum. Now, in between the auricles and ventricles, there is a septum that is called as Atrioventricular septum. It is made up of fibrous tissue, so it is non-conductive of impulse. We will discuss it later on. But it has two valves. Here is a tricuspid valve between right auricle and right ventricle, and on the left side there is a bicuspid valve. This is bicuspid between left auricle and left ventricle. The function of these valves is that when ventricle contracts, when the pressure in the ventricle raises, then these valves are shut so as to prevent the backflow of blood, that is regurgitation of blood from ventricles to auricles. Now, at the opening of pulmonary aorta in the right ventricle, there is a valve which controls the backflow of blood from the aorta into the ventricle, because when the ventricle relaxes, the pressure in the ventricle reduces and the blood tries to flow down from the aorta into the ventricle. So, at that time these semilunar valves are shut like this and they prevent the backflow of blood. Similarly, there are valves at the opening of aorta in the left ventricle which are called aortic valves. These valves also prevent the backflow of blood from aorta into the ventricle at the time of ventricular relaxation. Now, this is the same as I just mentioned. The right atrium receives the blood from all the body parts through inferior vena cava, superior vena cava and coronary sinus. Then it is poured into the right ventricle, and from right ventricle it is pumped into pulmonary aorta, supplied to the lungs for oxygenation. Then pulmonary circulation, this is important. Pulmonary circulation starts from the right ventricle. It takes oxygenated blood from the lungs and brings it back to the heart. So, from right ventricle to left atrium, the deoxygenated blood is pumped from right ventricle and it is received back into the left atrium. So, this forms pulmonary circulation. The left atrium receives blood from the lungs, then it is poured into left ventricle, and from left ventricle it is pumped into aorta or systemic arch. It carries oxygenated blood to the tissue. This forms systemic circulation. This starts from left ventricle and the blood is returned back to the right atrium. Here the same thing is picturized in a different way. This is the pulmonary circulation, in which the blood is pumped from the right ventricle into the lungs, and from lungs it is supplied back to the right auricle. Similarly, in the systemic circulation, blood from the left ventricle is pumped into the body, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, different parts of the body, and then it is collected back into the right atrium. Now, heart is a muscular structure. It is a hollow structure which is covered by a double membrane, which is called pericardium. Now, this pericardium is further divided into an outer membrane made up of fibrous tissue that is called as fibrous pericardium. It is tough, and its main function is it prevents distension of heart. During relaxation, when blood is collected into the heart get distended. So, up to a limit it permits, otherwise this layer prevents more distension, over distension of heart. Then second is the serous pericardium. It is a sac of two membranes. The outer one is called as parietal pericardium and the inner one is called visceral pericardium. This is called serous because it secretes a watery liquid that is filled in the cavity between parietal pericardium and visceral pericardium. This is called as pericardial fluid. It is about 15 ml. Now, the function of this pericardial fluid is that during contraction of heart, it minimizes the friction of heart muscles between the outer sac, that is pericardium, and the heart muscles. Now, wall of the heart, it is made up of 3 layers. The outermost layer is called epicardium, the middle layer, which is a muscular layer, is called myocardium, and the inner layer, it is called as endocardium. So, epicardium is nothing but we have seen that there is a visceral pericardium. That visceral pericardium is itself is epicardium of heart. Then the most important layer of heart from the point of view of its contractility is the myocardium. It is the layer which is made up of cardiac muscles. The atrial wall is thinner as compared to the wall of ventricles. The atrial wall is about 2 mm in thickness, whereas the ventricular walls are thicker. In that also there is a difference. The wall of left ventricle is about double thick than the right ventricle. In left ventricle, the thickness is 10 mm, whereas in the right ventricle, it is just half, that is 5 mm. Now, this difference in thickness of myocardium is directly correlated to the pumping capacity of right and left ventricle. You know, left ventricle has to pump the blood into all organs of the body, throughout the body, with a significant pressure. Therefore, its wall is thicker than that of the right ventricle. Now, this endocardium is the innermost layer made up of epithelium, that is endothelium. Now, this layer of endothelium of heart is continuous with the endothelium of blood vessels. As we have just seen in the picture, the heart has 4 no return valves. When we say no return valve means it only allows the flow of blood through the heart in one direction. It does not allow the backflow of blood, that is regurgitation of blood into the ventricles or into the auricles, depending upon systole or diastole. So, there are 4 valves, 2 valves are AV valves, atrioventricular valves, which are present at the opening of atrium into ventricles. The right AV valve is tricuspid and the left AV valve is bicuspid. It is called mitral valve. Mitre is the word used for the headgear of bishop. So, its structure is like that, therefore, it is termed as mitral valve. AV valve prevents regurgitation of blood from ventricles to auricle during ventricular systole. You know, when ventricle contracts, the pressure inside the ventricle increases, so blood tends to regurgitate in the auricles. At that time, the valves are like this, these valves are shut like this, so they prevent backflow of blood from ventricles to auricles. So, therefore, these valves closes at the time of ventricular systole. Now, there are valves in the opening of aorta and pulmonary artery in the ventricles, and these prevents backflow of blood from aorta to ventricle during ventricular relaxation. When ventricle relaxes, the blood tends to return back into the ventricles because the pressure in ventricle is less than the pressure of blood in aorta. So, therefore, at that time these valves closes. That means these valves closes at the time of ventricular relaxation. Now, here is a picture where you can see the valves in a simplified way. Right auricle, left auricle, right ventricle, left ventricle. In the opening of right auricle to right ventricle, that is right atrium to right ventricle, there is a right AV valve, which is a tricuspid valve. And here at the junction of left auricle and left ventricle, there is a bicuspid valve, we also called as mitral valve. Then there are valves at the opening of pulmonary aorta, this one, this is semilunar. Similarly, there are valves at the opening of aorta into left ventricle. this is also semilunar. So, these valves prevent backflow of blood, or in other words, they allow only flow of blood in a particular direction. Say for example, from here blood is poured into right ventricle, and from right ventricle it is pumped into the pulmonary aorta. Here from left auricle it is poured into left ventricle, and from left ventricle it is pumped into aorta. The reverse flow of blood is checked with the help of these 4 one-way valves. Now coming on to the cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is very special. You must have studied there are 2 types of muscles: smooth muscles, which are involuntary, which never fatigue, do not have striations or sarcomeres, and the striated or skeletal muscles, which have sarcomeres and which contracts powerfully and gets fatigue. But the cardiac muscle is a combination of these 2. The cardiac muscles are striated like skeletal muscles. They are having myofibrils and proteins, contractile proteins like actin, myosin. Now the muscles are arranged in a lattice work, means these muscles are branched, they become branched, they join the adjacent muscle, forming a gap junction there, which is called as intercalated discs. So they form a meshwork, and the most important character of cardiac muscle that they are self-excitatory, means they can generate the impulse by themselves. So they are called as autorhythmic. You know, they basically heart is of 2 types. One is called as neurogenic and the another is called as myogenic. And myogenic. You know, when the impulse of heart is generated through the nerve, it is called neurogenic. So many of the invertebrates have that kind of heart, but the vertebrates have myogenic heart. Their heart can contract by itself. So the wave of contraction, the impulse of contraction is generated in the cardiac muscle itself. So the cardiac muscle is autorhythmic. However, the impulse of cardiac muscle can be modulated through nerves, through hormones or certain other chemicals. Now, these 2 important characteristics of heart muscle makes it special. One is, as I just mentioned, that the heart muscles, they get branched, then they are again connected with the adjoining muscles. So at that point they form gap junctions, and those points are called as intercalated disc. Now this presence of gap junctions allows the crossing of impulse from one muscle fiber to another muscle fiber very quickly, and therefore heart, part of heart, all the muscles, they work spontaneously and collectively because of the presence of these gap junctions. Now another character of heart muscle is, since you know this is one heart muscle, another heart muscle is connected here. Okay, this is the intercalated disc by which they are connected. Now, these muscles are nucleated. Now, when it looks like a multinucleated structure which is called as syncytium. So, the cardiac muscles functions as a syncytium and therefore they can contract simultaneously. All the muscles will contract simultaneously at a point. Now, here you can see the structure of heart muscle as it's seen under the microscope. And these are the muscle fibers. As you see, these are branched fibers. There are sarcomeres. This is sarcomere. This is sarcomere, where contractile proteins are there. Those proteins are actin and myosin proteins. Then these are connected with these intercalated discs, and as such the whole structure looks like a syncytium. It looks like a multinucleated structure, and because of this structure, because of the presence of large amount of glycogen, large number of mitochondria, the heart muscle is able to contract simultaneously, and it is able to contract throughout the life. Now, as mentioned earlier, the heart is myogenic. The impulse can be generated in the specialized muscles. Those specialized muscles forms a system in heart which is called conducting system of heart. This is a specialized cardiac tissue which is capable of rapid initiation and transmission of cardiac impulse. These are collectively called as junctional tissue because this is present at different junctions in the heart. It is also called as conducting system of heart. It is made up of 4 components broadly. One is the sinoatrial node, that is SA node. Another is AB node, that is atrioventricular node, the bundle of His and Purkinje fibers. Here in this picture, you can see the location of the conducting system. You know, in right auricle, just at the opening of superior vena cava, near that, there is a nodal tissue called SA node. This is also called as sinus node, because in lower vertebrates, near this right auricle, right atrium, a sinus used to be there. This node was present at the junction of sinus and atrium, therefore it is called as sinoatrial node. The term continues as such, however, there is no sinus in case of human heart. So, there is a node here, and from that node there are 2 pathways which goes up to the AV node. AV node is also present in the right atrium at the point where the coronary sinus opens in the right auricle. So, then this AV node continues as a bundle of fiber which is called as bundle of His, or it is also called as AB bundle. It is branched into left and right branches. The left branch supplies to the left part of ventricle, right branch supplies to the right part of the ventricle, and finally these are branched into Purkinje fibers which supplies to the cardiac muscles of ventricles. as I just mentioned the situation of SA node. Now here the important thing is the SA node can generate the impulse by itself at a rate of 70 to 80 impulses per minute. That means the heart will contract or heart will beat at this rate. So, since this node maintains the pace of heartbeat, it is called pacemaker of heart. And it is in a rhythmic way it occurs, therefore it is called as sinus rhythm. Now AB node, as I mentioned just now, it is present at the junction of interauricular septum and interventricular septum between right auricle and right ventricle at the opening of coronary sinus, and it also generates impulse. So, it generates at the rate of 40 to 60 per minute. Just remember, the SA node generates at the rate of 70 per minute, and this can generate at the rate of 40 to 60 per minute. So, even if SA node does not function, this can serve as a pacemaker, but the heart will beat at a lower rate of 40 to 60 per minute. Therefore, AB node is called as reserve pacemaker of heart. Now, bundle of His is the bundle of fibers which originates from the AV node, and it is supplied into the ventricles through interventricular septum. This is also a autorhythmic tissue. It can generate the cardiac impulse at the rate 36 per minute. So, it is in decreasing order, 70 to 40 to 60 to 35. That is the average value, 35, 36. Okay. So, if both SA node and AV nodes are not working, even then the heart can beat, but at a lower rate of 36. Then Purkinje fiber named so due to the name of scientist Purkinje, who discovered it in 1845. These are terminal arborizations of the fibers of bundle of His. These conduct impulse quickly to the ventricular wall. These can also initiate impulse at the same rate of bundle of His, that is about 30 to 35 per minute. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the heart rate, although it is generated by the conducting system of heart, that is SA node, it can be modulated, or it can be controlled, or it can be regulated by the nervous system. The cardiac center is located in medulla oblongata, and from there the autonomic nervous system, the nerves are supplied to the heart, different regions of the heart, for the control of working of heart. There are two segments of autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. The parasympathetic supply is through the 10th cranial nerve, that is vagus, so it is called as vagal innervation. These originates from the vagal nuclei situated in the cardiac center of medulla oblongata. These supply both the sides of the heart, right side and left side both. Now, right vagus supplies to the right part of the heart, right atrium and SA node. Its stimulation strongly inhibits the heart rate. That is very important. The function of parasympathetic segment of autonomic nervous system is to calm down the activities of the body, including the heartbeat. So, it brings the heart rate lower. That means it brings the heart rate back to the normal. The left vagus innervates left atrium and AB node, bundle of His. Its stimulation slows AB nodal conduction. Both of these vagus, they stimulate the cardiac tissue to decrease the heart rate. Now, the basal heart rate is basically dependent on the vagal tone, because if you denervate the sympathetic nerve, or if you denervate both the nerves, even then heart will beat, but the heart rate may increase from 70 to 110, like that. Now, sympathetic innervation. The sympathetic fibers are supplied from the chain of ganglia, sympathetic ganglia. For heart, the fibers are supplied from lower 3 cervical segments and upper 5 thoracic ganglion. The fibers are supplied to the heart. These sympathetic fibers, they are supplied to nodes and auricle, ventricle. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates force and contraction and heartbeat, force of contraction and the heart rate both. So, sympathetic nervous system increases the force of contraction and the heartbeat, whereas parasympathetic system decreases the heart rate. Here in this table, you can see the parameters which are increased or decreased by parasympathetic or sympathetic stimulation. Almost all the parameters are increased by sympathetic stimulation, whereas these are decreased by parasympathetic, increased by sympathetic. Here you can see the chronotropic effect, that is effect on the heart rate, decreased by vagal stimulation, that is parasympathetic, and increased by sympathetic stimulation. Then dromotropic effect, that is rate of conduction of impulse in the heart muscle. Again it is decreased here, increased in sympathetic. Then bathmotropic effect, that is excitability of heart muscle. Again it is decreased in parasympathetic, increased in sympathetic. Then inotropic, that is myocardial contractility, that is also decreased here and increased here. So, the basal heart rate depends on the vagal tone. The denervation of heart increases heart rate from 70 to 110 per minute. As I just mentioned, the vagal nerve supply importantly brings the heart rate to normal. If it is removed, then heart rate will increase. Then some of the characteristics of cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle has a character called automicity. It is myogenic, so they can generate the impulse by themselves. The impulse is generated by the SA node. Basically, it is called pacemaker. The heart will continue to beat even if it is denervated, or even if it is removed in some experiment from the animals outside the body, placed in the normal saline, then also heart keeps beating. Again the same thing, autorhythmicity of heart. The heart maintains its rhythms. The SA node maintain rhythm at the rate of 60 to 100 per minute, averaging 70 to 75 or 72 like that. The AV bundle can maintain a rate up to 40 to 60 per minute. So the cardiac pacemaker have a hierarchy among themselves. If SA node fails, the AV node and other pacemakers are also activated. They are called secondary pacemakers. Now here you can see the rate of impulse per minute. SA node 60 to 100, AV node 40 to 60, bundle of S. This is a range 35 to 40. We previously mentioned the average value of 35. Similar is the case of Purkinje fiber and ventricular muscle at the rate of 15 to 30 per minute. Now another character is the conductivity. The heart muscles, cardiac muscles can conduct the impulse very fast. Then contractility, they can contract as a unit. Then excitability, the cardiac muscles can be excited by the hormones, by the nerves, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. Sometimes they are excited by the ionic concentration. Another feature is the distensibility. During diastole, the cardiac chambers, they are distended. Then one of the important character of cardiac muscle is their refractory period. Refractory period is the period when next contraction cannot occur before the refractory period is over. So heart muscle works and rests for almost equal time, or sometimes it rests for more time than it contracts. So that is an important point. Therefore, cardiac muscle cannot be titanized. Titanized contractions is a state of continuous contraction when muscle get fatigued due to accumulation of lactic acid. So here in this case, due to long refractory period, the successive contraction cannot occur quickly. Then another important function is it is functional syncytium. Because of the intercalated disc, all the muscle fibers, they contract simultaneously. Then, like nerve fiber, the cardiac muscles also follow all or none law. If the stimulus is up to the threshold level, the muscle will contract at its full strength. Either it will contract at its full strength or it will not. If the level is below threshold level, then it will not contract. Now there is another character, that is staircase phenomena. The contraction of cardiac muscle depends upon the composition of muscle cell. The size and glycogen increases the rate of conduction, but the duration of systole, the refractory period and rhythmicity increases in reverse order. Now, isn't it amazing that the heart keep on beating throughout our life? When heart is formed in the embryonic stage and it starts beating for supplying the blood to different tissues of the embryo, and till it beats, we are alive. As soon as it stops, we're dead. So, the cardiac muscles of the heart continues to beat throughout the life without being tired or without being fatigued. This is because of the facts that the cardiac muscle has got very long refractory period. You know, if we take the cardiac cycle, the atrial muscle work for 0.1 second and it rests for 0.2 seconds. Whereas the ventricular muscles, they contract for 0.3 second and relaxes for 0.5 second. So, this long is a refractory period because of which the heart muscle work for a lesser duration and it relaxes for a longer duration. Therefore, it do not fatigue. Second is heart is richly supplied with blood. As I mentioned earlier, that heart is supplied with 10% of the total volume of blood. So, it has sufficient oxygen supply and nutrient supply. Then aerobic metabolism. You know, the fatigue is caused due to accumulation of lactic acid due to anaerobic pathway. Now, in heart there is sufficient supply of oxygen, so there is always aerobic metabolism. And then for maintaining the heart rate and metabolism of muscles, the heart muscle contains numerous mitochondria. You can see here as much as almost 1/3 of the weight of cardiac muscle is the weight of mitochondria. That's all for today. Keep your heart beating for yourself, to keep yourself fit, and keep your heart beating for others also, because a doctor should be fit enough to maintain the fitness of his patient. Thank you very much.